Elkhart Springs, Tennessee, was the kind of town where folks still left their doors unlocked and waved at passing cars, even if they didn't recognize the driver. Nestled between pine-covered hills and stitched together by Tulane Highway, the town was quiet, God-fearing, and proud. It had one grocery store, one high school, and one man everybody respected, Sheriff Luther Briggs. At 52, Luther had spent nearly half his life wearing the badge. He was tall, broad-shouldered, always dressed in crisp tan uniforms with polished boots and a silver star pinned to his chest like it meant more than just authority. It meant trust. After his wife, Deborah, died of breast cancer a decade earlier, Luther never remarried. Some hearts don't heal, he'd say, and people believed him. They admired his loyalty, his quiet strength, his sorrow. He lived alone in a 2-story farmhouse just outside of town, tucked behind a thicket of old oak trees. Most folks figured he liked the solitude. After all, who could blame a widower for wanting peace after years of grief? What no one knew, not the mayor, not the reverend, not even his own deputies, was that Sheriff Luther Briggs had been keeping a secret behind those locked barn doors. A secret that stretched back 9 years. A secret with a name. The townspeople saw him as a protector, a man who stood at the front of church on Sundays, who handed out candy at the 4th of July parade, who made time to visit elderly shut-ins and scared kids alike. They never once questioned his integrity. And maybe that was the problem, because when power comes wrapped in a smile and dressed in a uniform, it's easy to overlook the shadows behind it. On the surface, everything looked fine. Elkhart Springs hadn't had a homicide in almost 15 years. The biggest scandal was when the school's football coach got caught drunk driving on Main Street. Sheriff Briggs had been the one to pull him over, too. He didn't play favorites, they'd say. He was fair, firm, decent. But what the town didn't see, what it never even imagined, was the young girl who'd once knocked on Luther Briggs' door with rain in her hair and fear in her eyes, looking for help, and never left. And what began as kindness turned into control. What began as shelter became a prison without bars. And what began as a secret would one day end in murder. But that part of the story, the ending, would take nearly a decade to arrive. And when it did, it would tear the town in half. For now, though, the sheriff was just a sheriff. Steady, silent, smiling, and the clock on his lie was still ticking. Her name was Rhea Thompson, but by the time she stumbled into Sheriff Luther Briggs' life, she hadn't heard it spoken with kindness in over a year. She was 19, barely a woman, but already wanted in 3 states. In the spring of 2014, Rhea and a much older boyfriend had been caught on surveillance during a failed armed robbery at a gas station in Birmingham. Rhea hadn't always been a fugitive. Before the headlines, before the mugshots, she was just a quiet girl with a notebook full of poems and a dream of becoming a nurse. She'd grown up outside Montgomery, Alabama, raised by a grandmother who taught her how to sew and how to keep secrets. Her mother had vanished when she was 10. Her father had never been in the picture. By the time she turned 16, Rhea had already slipped through every crack in the system, shuffled between relatives, overlooked at school, invisible to the people who were supposed to protect her. Then came Darren. He was 28, charming, with a crooked smile and a silver chain around his neck that sparkled when he said her name. He told her she was special, that she was beautiful, that he could take her away from the rusted trailers and quiet desperation of her world. She believed him. At first, he was just a ride out of town. Then, he was the one holding her phone, controlling her food, telling her what to wear. He gave her a burner ID, told her to dye her hair, and when the money ran out, he handed her a gun. Just stand by the door, he said. Don't even have to use it. Just hold it. The first time, they got away with a few $100. The second time, they got caught. She didn't pull the trigger. She didn't even speak during the robbery. But the camera caught her face and the justice system didn't care that she was a scared teenager manipulated by a grown man. She was 17, with no lawyer, no family in court. And when Darren made bail and disappeared, Raya was left holding the blame and the consequences. No one was hurt, but the gun was real, and so were the charges. Her boyfriend got out on bail. She didn't. At 17, she was sent to a juvenile detention facility outside Memphis, a place that smelled like bleach and broken promises. She stayed quiet, kept to herself, but behind her wide, sharp eyes was a mind always turning. And one night, during a thunderstorm that knocked out half the cameras, she disappeared. They said she scaled the outer fence barefoot, that she cut her hand open on barbed wire and ran anyway, that the dogs lost her scent at the edge of a creek. They searched for a week, then a month, and then they stopped. By fall, she was a ghost. No ID, no family to claim her. Just a teenage fugitive sleeping in the back of abandoned pickups, stealing crackers from gas stations, and moving at night like an animal avoiding the light. Until the night, she tried to cross the state line into Tennessee and met Sheriff Luther Briggs. He wasn't on patrol. He wasn't even supposed to be out that late. But something he'd later tell others made him turn down that dark stretch of road through Pine Hollow Pass. That's when he saw her. Thin, dirty, limping, a girl in a hoodie too big for her body, one hand wrapped in a bloody t-shirt, the other clutching a stolen backpack like it held her whole life. He pulled over slowly, rolled down the window. "You all right, sweetheart?" he asked. She didn't speak at first, just stared like a deer deciding whether to bolt. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "You need help." And that's how it started. No handcuffs. No radio call. No arrest. He brought her back to his farmhouse, cleaned the cut on her hand, let her shower, gave her clothes that used to belong to his late wife. He cooked her scrambled eggs and let her sleep on the old couch. And when she finally told him her name, he didn't report her. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was something darker. Whatever the reason, Sheriff Briggs made a choice that night. He would protect Raya Thompson, but not the way a lawman should. He would hide her, keep her, shape her into something that no longer threatened him, no longer reminded him of the life he'd lost. And slowly, day by day, what began as pity turned into possession. By winter, Raya was living in a small guest house behind the sheriff's barn. Her hair was longer. Her clothes were nicer. Her eyes had stopped darting like a cornered dog. But she never left the property. She never touched a phone. And she never stopped watching the road from the window. Because deep down she knew she was still a prisoner, just in prettier chains. The guest house behind Sheriff Luther Briggs' barn looked ordinary from the outside. White siding, 2 windows, a screen door that creaked in summer. But on the inside, it was a cage with curtains. Raya lived there, ate there, slept there, gave birth there. Not once in those early years did she step foot beyond the property line. Sheriff Briggs told the world she was a distant cousin's daughter, come to stay while getting back on her feet. A trouble girl, he said, needed structure, privacy. And in Elkhart Springs, folks didn't ask questions. Not when it came to Luther. He brought her groceries himself, picked up any prescriptions under fake names. He'd even smoothed things over with a nurse at the county clinic who owed him a favor. No paperwork, he told her. This girl's been through hell. But the truth was, Raya hadn't escaped anything. She just traded one form of captivity for another. Only now, she was pregnant. The first baby, a girl, was born in the middle of the night on a stormy Sunday in 2015. Luther delivered her himself, cut the cord with trembling hands, held the child like a miracle. Raya named her Mila, after her grandmother. For a moment, she thought maybe things would change, that Luther would soften, that she'd have some say in her life again. But instead, the rules got tighter. No visitors, he told her. No mail. No calls. No questions. He enrolled Mila in homeschooling programs under a fake guardian name. Said it was for her safety. Said the world outside was too dangerous. Raya stopped arguing after the first time he raised his voice. The second time, he slammed a cabinet hard enough to make her flinch. The third time, he grabbed her wrist and didn't let go until she cried. And then came the second pregnancy. Then the third. 3 children. 3 births in secret. 3 new locks on the doors, just to be sure. Raya wrote in a spiral notebook late at night while the children slept. She hid the notebook in a loose panel under the bed. Her handwriting, once graceful, became tight and rushed, like someone trying to finish before the alarm goes off. He says I'm lucky. Says no one else would have taken me in. But I don't feel lucky. I feel invisible. I asked about taking Mila to the park. He said the sun's too strong. I think he just doesn't want anyone to see me. Sometimes I look out the window and imagine I'm someone else. Someone with a life. A voice. A name that means something again. But in the daylight, she smiled for the children. Told them Daddy worked hard. That someday they'd go to school. She played house in a house that wasn't hers. She played mother with a man who played God. There were moments, quiet, confusing moments, when Raya almost forgot she was a prisoner. Like the time she baked cupcakes with Mila's help for what Luther called Family Day. He brought a disposable camera and made them all pose by the garden fence, his arms slung over her shoulder like they were just another happy couple in the countryside. When Raya hesitated to smile, he whispered through his teeth, "Don't make this harder than it has to be." She smiled. Other times, he'd leave her magazines from town, Southern Living, Better Homes and Gardens, and tell her to pick a paint color for the kitchen. "Make it feel like yours," he'd say, but never did, even with the new curtains, even with the herb garden. She tried to create routines to keep from unraveling. Morning walks with the kids around the backyard fence. Story time before naps. Whispering songs her grandmother once hummed. She clung to those rituals like a woman holding onto the edge of a cliff. At night, when the children slept, she'd sit by the window with the lights off and listen for any sound from the main house. Sometimes she'd see his silhouette pass by the barn with a flashlight. Other times, he'd just stand there, watching the guest house. Once on Mila's 3rd birthday, Raya asked if they could take a picnic by the lake. Just once. Just for an hour. Luther's jaw twitched. "People go to the lake," he said flatly. "You want folks asking questions?" Then he brought a cake from town. A balloon. He even sang. Later that night, he gave Raya a gold locket. Inside was a tiny photo of him and Mila. Raya stared at it for a long time. "Why am I not in it?" she asked. Luther shrugged. "Because I'm the one holding everything together." And Luther? He brought home toys, built a swing set, took photos in front of the fireplace every Christmas. From the outside, it looked like a perfect little family. But behind the smiles and plastic picture frames, the walls were closing in, because Raya had never stopped remembering who she really was. And one day, when the time was right, she would try to run. It was the kind of case Elkhart Springs never saw coming. On a chilly morning in February 2023, a local hunter stumbled upon a body in the woods just outside the county line, about 20 miles from Sheriff Briggs' property. The victim, Jeremiah Red Givens, 34 years old, with a long rap sheet and a history of bouncing between Alabama and Tennessee. Shot twice. Left face down near an abandoned shack. When the news hit the sheriff's department, Luther kept his voice calm, as always. "Probably a drug deal gone bad," he told his deputies. "Let the feds sort it out." And sort it out they did. The case fell into the hands of Special Agent Colton Myers, a quiet but relentless investigator out of the Knoxville FBI field office. Givens had been on the Bureau's radar for years. Arms trafficking, robbery, and rumored ties to a missing juvenile fugitive case from 2014. A girl named Raya Thompson. Myers didn't think much of it at first. Givens was bad news, and his enemies had been stacking up for years. But when the forensic team ran DNA swabs from under Givens' fingernails, they hit something strange. It wasn't Raya's DNA. It wasn't Luther's. It was a partial match. To a child. A 6-year-old girl enrolled in a homeschool database under the name Emily Brown, a name that didn't exist before 2017. Her supposed guardian? A woman named Margaret Brooks, whose listed address traced back to a vacant lot in Memphis. The red flags went off instantly. Myers dug deeper. The birth certificate was fake. The mother's name was missing. No medical records, no Social Security activity prior to age 2. Just a fabricated paper trail leading nowhere. So he made a trip to Elkhart Springs. Quiet. No sirens. Just a plain car and polite questions. At the sheriff's department, Briggs welcomed him like any Southern lawman would, with strong coffee and firm handshakes. But when Myers asked about a homeschooled child named Emily Brown, Luther's jaw tightened. Doesn't ring a bell, he said too quickly. Then a pause. If there's a kid in danger, I'll help however I can. It was convincing. Too convincing. So Myers changed tactics. He asked to speak with local nurses, anyone who'd helped deliver children off the books. He pulled traffic cams, researched missing persons, pieced together whispers about a woman seen on Luther Briggs' property over the years. Always inside, never in town. A neighbor recalled once seeing a thin girl in a headscarf behind the trees near the guest house. That was 5 years ago. No one had seen her since. What Myers found next blew the case wide open. A school volunteer snapped a candid photo at a homeschooling co-op event 2 counties over. Among the crowd, a child smiled at the camera, front teeth missing, pigtails flying. On her wrist, a bracelet with the name Mila engraved in tiny script. Myers ran the photo through facial recognition. The child was not Emily Brown. She was Mila Thompson, daughter of Raya Thompson, the missing fugitive. And suddenly, the house of cards Luther Briggs had built with such care began to collapse. Raya knew something had changed. Luther had been tense for weeks, quiet in a different way. He no longer lingered after dinner. He stopped bringing her little surprises from town. He barely looked at her when she spoke. And when she caught him standing outside the guest house one night, just staring through the window at the children sleeping, something in his eyes chilled her to the bone. He knew. He didn't say it. He didn't have to. Raya had lived in fear long enough to recognize the moment when control started to unravel. In the days leading up to that moment, Raya had felt the shift, not in loud arguments, but in the silence. Luther no longer touched her gently. He no longer brought groceries with kind words or looked her in the eyes when he handed Mila a book. His affection had curdled into surveillance. He watched everything, not just what she did, but what she felt. Once, she tried to ask him if the children could start going to a real school. They're falling behind, she said softly. They don't know other kids. Mila's asking questions. He didn't answer right away. He simply stared at her, then walked to the cabinet and shut it hard. The sound made her flinch. The children looked up from their coloring books. Luther turned and said coldly, "You want someone else raising them? Teaching them lies? You want people sniffing around here, taking them from you?" For me, he meant, but he didn't say it. That night, he locked the guest house door from the outside. He'd never done that before. Another day, Raya saw him burning papers in a metal bin behind the barn. When he noticed her watching, he didn't wave or smile, just stared until she went back inside. She stopped sleeping. Her mind never quieted. Even the children began to sense the tension. Mila started having nightmares again, and little Eli cried when Luther raised his voice. Raya began packing a small bag in secret. Diapers, protein bars, the little cash she'd hidden behind a loose floorboard. She reread every journal entry and tucked it into a folder, wrapping it with an old baby blanket. She wasn't just planning to run. She was preparing to survive. A week earlier, she'd slipped a folded note into the back pocket of a home care nurse who occasionally visited for the children's checkups. The note was short, scribbled in pencil, and then signed. My name is Raya Thompson. I've been held here against my will for years. I have 3 children. Please help. She hadn't dared to write more. Whether the nurse saw it or not, Raya didn't know. But Luther was different ever since. His routine shifted. His smile vanished. And his tone, when he spoke to her, now had an edge, a coldness she hadn't heard since the very beginning. That Friday night, after tucking the kids into bed and kissing them extra long, Raya packed a small bag. Just a few clothes, the notebook she'd been hiding for years, and a photo of Mila as a baby. She waited until the house lights went out. Listened for the sound of Luther's boots walking back across the gravel. She knew the guest house door creaked, so she climbed out the back window barefoot and slipped into the dark. The air was damp, the trees thick. She didn't look back. She didn't know where she was going. Just away. She made it past the tool shed, past the edge of the pasture. She could already see the neighbor's mailbox across the ridge, the first sign of the world beyond Luther's land. And then she heard it, gravel shifting, a flashlight clicking on, and the voice she'd once trusted with her life. Raya. She froze. Her name hadn't sounded like her name in years. It had become something else, something he used to tether her in place. She turned, slowly. There he was, still in uniform, still holding that calm, dead-eyed stare. "Where were you going?" he asked. She clutched the bag to her chest. "I was going to tell the truth." For a moment, he didn't move. Then he took a step forward. "You were going to ruin everything. I was going to survive." And that's when Luther reached for the pistol at his hip. Raya ran, branches toward her skin. Her foot caught a root, and she stumbled hard, landing on her side. The notebook flew from her bag, pages fluttering into the night like frightened birds. She scrambled to grab it, but Luther was already there. He didn't shout. He didn't strike. He knelt beside her, cupped her face in one hand, and whispered, "I loved you more than anyone ever will." Then he pulled the trigger. One shot. Clean. Close. The forest went still. The next morning, Luther reported that Raya had taken her own life in the barn, claimed she'd been depressed, overwhelmed, and unstable. He even produced a suicide note. Typed, printed, signed with her name. But what he didn't know, what would later haunt him, was that one of the pages from her notebook had been found near the fence line by a neighbor's dog. It read, "If anything happens to me, it was him, Luther Briggs, the sheriff. He's not who you think he is." Sheriff Luther Briggs stood in front of the congregation with his head bowed low, his voice breaking as he read the eulogy. The church was filled with flowers, a closed casket, and whispers of tragedy. "She was troubled," he said. "A beautiful soul, but fragile. I try to protect her. God knows I tried." No one questioned him. Why would they? He was the sheriff, the widower, the man who'd taken in a girl with no family and given her and her kids a home. Tragic, they said. Poor man. But Agent Colton Myers had been in law enforcement too long to fall for a tidy story tied up with a bow. Raya's suicide note was typed. Clean. Perfect spelling. Her journal entries, by contrast, were messy, emotional, and full of raw, misspelled pleas. The tone didn't match. The language didn't match. And then there was the gunshot wound. The autopsy noted the shot was angled upward from below the chin, but no powder burns were present. An impossible detail for a close-range suicide. There was also bruising on her arms, defensive in nature. Scratches on her legs, as if she'd been running through woods. Myers leaned back in his chair in the Elkhart Springs precinct, staring at the crime scene photos. "This isn't suicide," he muttered. "This is a cover-up." And then came the dog. A neighbor's Labrador had wandered back to its owner's porch 3 days after the funeral, tail wagging, carrying a folded page of notebook paper in its mouth. The handwriting was erratic but familiar. Myers read the note, then read it again. If anything happens to me, it was him. Luther Briggs, the sheriff. He's not who you think he is. That was enough for a search warrant. The FBI returned to the property under federal authority. Luther wasn't home, out doing community patrols, his deputy said. But the team moved fast. They searched the barn, the guest house, the attic, and in the crawl space beneath the floorboards of the guest house bedroom. Tucked in a tin lunchbox, they found the full journal. Spanning nearly 9 years, from 2014 to 2023, it told the whole story. How Raya had been taken in, how she'd never been allowed to leave, the children born in secret, the escalating threats, and her final attempt to escape. Each page was dated, with names, locations, and exact quotes. One entry read, "He says he'll kill me before he lets me go, that he'd rather bury me out back than watch me tell the world what he did." The final entry, dated 2 nights before her death, simply read, "I'm going. I don't care what happens anymore. If he finds me, he'll kill me. But if I stay, I'm already dead." Luther was arrested 2 days later. He didn't resist, didn't speak. At the press conference, Myers didn't sugarcoat it. Sheriff Luther Briggs used his badge as a mask. What he did behind closed doors wasn't law enforcement. It was imprisonment, abuse, and ultimately murder. Back at the station, deputies wept. They couldn't believe it. But the journal didn't lie, and neither did the children. The courthouse in Nashville was packed. Journalists from every major network lined the steps, cameras ready. The story had spread far beyond Tennessee. It wasn't just a small-town scandal anymore. It was national. A respected sheriff, a long-missing teenage fugitive, a hidden family, and a murder that shattered everything. State of Tennessee versus Luther Briggs opened with quiet tension. The prosecution came armed with facts, forensics, journal entries, and damning testimony from FBI Special Agent Colton Myers. But the most powerful evidence of all came not from experts or agents. It came from Mila, now 8 years old. She took the stand with a stuffed rabbit in her arms. Her voice was soft, eyes wide and confused. She didn't know the weight of her words, but everyone in that courtroom did. "Mommy wanted to take us to the park," Mila said. She said someday we'd go to a real school. She said Daddy didn't let her. The night she left, she kissed me twice. She was crying. And then came the hard part. "Did your daddy hurt your mommy?" the prosecutor asked gently. Mila hesitated, then whispered. "He said she was sick, but I heard them yelling. I think he made her go away." In the gallery, grown men wept. Luther sat stone-faced, dressed in a dark suit, hair now grayer, hands trembling slightly. He refused to testify. His lawyers argued diminished capacity, emotional trauma, grief. Said he tried to help Raya, that she was unstable, that she manipulated him. But the jury read her journals. They saw the bruises, the birth records, the forged identities. They heard from the nurse who helped deliver the third baby and confessed through tears that she was scared of what would happen if she said no to the sheriff. The courtroom leaned in when the nurse took the stand. Her name was Janine Wallace. Late 50s, worked part-time at the county clinic for over 20 years. She looked down as she spoke, her hands trembling. "I didn't know who she was at first," Janine said. "He told me her name was Marie Brooks. Said she was a cousin's daughter with some trauma. Asked me to come out after hours. No ID, no paperwork. Just cash in an envelope." The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "And you agreed?" Janine nodded slowly. "He was the sheriff. I thought maybe it was just off the books. But then I saw her. She wouldn't speak. She looked broken. And he never left the room. Did you ever think about calling someone?" "I did. But he warned me. You make noise about this, you'll regret it. I've delivered babies for addicts, teens, even inmates. But nothing ever felt like this. It felt wrong, and I didn't do anything. She broke down crying. The judge called for a brief recess. When court resumed, the defense brought out their strategy. Luther's lead attorney, Mark Devlin, sharp-suited and smooth, tried painting Raya as unstable. She had a record, he said. She was a runaway. Manipulative. My client gave her shelter, stability. If anything, he was her victim. Whispers filled the room. But the prosecution didn't flinch. In her closing argument, Assistant District Attorney Camille Rhodes, a black woman in her early 40s, stood tall and firm. "Don't let the badge fool you," she began. "This man weaponized trust. He took a lost girl and turned her into property. He forged identities, erased her name, and called it protection. That's not love. That's coercive control." She paused, held up a page from Raya's journal. "This isn't about a sheriff who made a mistake. It's about a system that led him, a town that looked the other way, and a woman who kept writing until the truth could finally breathe." You could hear a pin drop, and then the prosecution read Raya's last entry aloud. "I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of my children growing up thinking this is what love looks like." The courtroom was silent. No one moved. No one coughed. It took the jury less than 4 hours. Verdict: guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, unlawful imprisonment, sexual assault of a minor, dating back to when Raya was 19 and under false custody, forgery, child endangerment, obstruction of justice. Sentence: life without parole. As the judge read the decision, Luther showed no emotion. But Mila, sitting in the front row next to her foster mother, asked a question out loud that broke the room. Can I still love him if he hurt her? The judge paused. No one knew what to say, because sometimes justice isn't clean. It isn't simple, and it doesn't fix what's been broken. After the trial, the children were placed in permanent care with a relative of Raya's who had come forward from Alabama after seeing the news. She held them tight and said, "Your mama's voice was heard, and she was strong." The first weeks in Alabama were quiet. Too quiet. Mila had trouble sleeping. Every creak in the floorboards made her sit up straight. She refused to close her bedroom door and always asked if the windows were locked. Her younger brothers, Eli and Jonah, clung to her like shadows, following her from room to room. Their new guardian, Aunt Clarice, was patient. She cooked warm meals, painted their names on bedroom walls, and filled the fridge with things they'd never had: grapes, pudding cups, cereal with cartoon characters. But healing didn't come with a new zip code. One afternoon, Mila found a stack of baby photos in a drawer. Raya holding her, smiling. Not the pose fireplace smile she remembered, but something softer. Free. She sat on the porch steps for over an hour, staring at the photo. Later that week, a school counselor came by. Mila was quiet at first. Then she asked, "Why didn't my mom leave sooner? Why didn't anyone help her?" The counselor didn't rush to answer. She just nodded, let the silence fill the space. Then gently said, "Sometimes people don't see cages when there are no bars. But your mother kept fighting, even when no one listened." Mila didn't cry. She just held the photo tighter. Eli started drawing pictures again: trees, stars, a house with no locks. Jonah, barely 4, called every stuffed animal mama. At night, Mila whispered stories to her brothers before bed. Not stories about castles or dragons, but about their mom. How brave she was, how smart she was, how much she loved them. And when she whispered, her voice stopped shaking. And Luther? He was sent to a maximum security prison where no badge, no name, and no reputation could protect him. The man who once stood for order now lived behind bars, alone, forgotten, and feared. 5 years later, a quiet auditorium in Montgomery, Alabama filled with the soft hum of conversation. Folding chairs, low lighting, a podium with a single microphone. On the screen behind it, a simple image, a faded photograph of a young woman holding a newborn, sunlight pouring through a cracked window. Raya Thompson, gone too soon, but not forgotten. Standing before the audience was a young woman, no longer a child. Mila Briggs, now 13, took a slow breath. She adjusted the bracelet on her wrist, the one that still bore her name in tiny letters. Her voice, when it came, was soft but sure. For a long time, I thought my story began with tragedy. But now I know. It began with a woman who refused to disappear. She paused, glanced at her two younger siblings sitting in the front row, then back to the crowd. My mother was smart. She was brave. And even when she was locked away, she found a way to speak. She wrote her truth down so that one day we would know. And now I carry her voice. Not her pain, not her silence, just her courage. The room was still. Among the guests were survivors of abuse, advocates for women's rights, and even members of law enforcement. People who had come to hear the story that had once shocked the nation, but had since faded from the headlines. Mila's speech, and the memoir compiled from Raya's journals, had rekindled interest. Titled The Sheriff's House, the book became a national bestseller, not for the scandal, but for the raw, unfiltered truth of a young woman's captivity, motherhood, and ultimate betrayal. All proceeds from the book went to a foundation Mila started with her foster aunt, called Raya's Light, a nonprofit offering housing and legal aid to women escaping coercive control and hidden abuse. The organization's motto was taken directly from one of Raya's final entries. Even when no one believes you, keep writing, because someone will. Someday, someone will believe. Back in Elkhart Springs, the old farmhouse was sold to a distant buyer. The barn was torn down. The guest house, too. All that remained of Luther Briggs was a grave in the prison cemetery. Unmarked. No visitors. No flowers. No legacy. But Raya? She had one. She had 3 children who spoke her name with pride. A generation of women inspired by her words. And a nation reminded that monsters don't always wear masks. Sometimes they wear uniforms. As the auditorium emptied that night, Mila stayed behind for a moment. She walked to the photo screen and placed her hand against the image of her mother holding her as a baby. I remember now, she whispered. You didn't die with fear. You died fighting. And because of you, I get to live free. Raya didn't die as a runaway. She died as a mother, a fighter, and a woman who refused to be erased.